What is exciting is this year we have more C-level executives than we've ever had at our conference, which means the level of ADD will run very high. So we're going to try and keep things at a quick pace and keep you interested and keep things going. A lot of people ask us, why do we do Zeitgeist? And they can't understand why we bring so many illustrious people from around the world into one room and don't spend as much time talking about the great things that people at Google do. We think it's way more interesting to get you all in the room and stimulate your brain, stimulate our thinking, and learn from you, as opposed to stand up here and tell you once a year what we do. Hopefully, we tell you that through our products and various things that we do around the world. So that's the reason we do this. This is the 12th time we've hosted this event. This is Lorraine and my 12th Zeitgeist at Google. So we're getting quite good at this. We do this once a year in Europe, once over here. And every time it's fascinating when you think back over the last year. Many of the things that have happened in the last year, I don't think many of us could have anticipated. And I was just standing at the corner and talking to some of my colleagues and saying, I have a lot of list of things that people have said that have happened in the last year, like the euro being in trouble, the global economy being in different places, Greece being in sort of its precarious position, WikiLeaks, phone hacking, phone tapping. I was actually turning around to them and saying, can you tell me 3 to 5 great things that happened in the last 12 months? No, this is a mind exercise early in the morning. I'd like you guys to think about 3 or 4 amazing things that happened in the last 12 months. Amazing and unequivocally amazing. Because some people told me, well, Egypt. Well, it's amazing for many, but not for some. So I'm just curious, Steve, because we all remember the things which are in trouble, Greece, the euro, WikiLeaks and stuff. I'd like you to think about what amazing things have happened in the last 12 months in the world. Well, anyway, the last year's title for our conference was Mind Shift. And we can see that we've been through a mind shift. What is interesting is, if you look at what transpires, is very often yesterday paves the way for the future. If yesterday didn't exist, we wouldn't have tomorrow. Sort of sounds very normal, of course. But what I mean in that context is, Google would not exist if people hadn't decided to put information on the web. Once people decide to put information on the web, we find a way to help people search it. But then you have ubiquity of broadband. Everybody gets connected to the web. And suddenly you can have social networking happen because it's hard to socially network with people who are not connected to the web. So that paves the way for the next phase. Once you begin to see things like social networking happen, you see a lot of companies that have sort of sprung up in the last 12 to 24 months, which use that as a platform for the next thing. So part of what we're hoping to stimulate today and over the course of the next 2 days is for all of us to think about the next thing. What is the current sort of evolution of technology, current evolution of businesses that will allow us to prepare for the next thing or will allow for the next thing to happen. So hopefully we'll hear some of those things throughout the course of the next day, day and a half. Before we go ahead and introduce the first session, I have one quick announcement to make. One of my colleagues, he probably may still be up the mountain. He does that 2 or 3 times in the morning before we start. Is Dennis Woodside. Is Dennis around? There you go. Dennis, I just want to stand up, and I want to thank Dennis Woodside for his amazing leadership for America's Business. He's my co-host and partner for this event. He's going to move on and do an interesting project for us at Google. I just want to thank him for all his hard work and his... And I also want to welcome Margot Georgiadis, who is still up the mountain for sure, who is going to take on his role, and hopefully you'll be as nice to her as you've been to Dennis, and hopefully she'll be a great partner to all of you. So with that behind us, my last thing for you guys is whenever I go to a conference, I get caught up by the proceedings, by the interesting speakers, and before I leave, I try and think about the one thing I'm going to do different as a consequence of the day and a half that I spent somewhere. So I'm going to leave you with that. When you leave tomorrow, I'm going to come back here and try and ask some of you, what do you think you're going to do different as a consequence of spending a day and a half with us? Because if he can stimulate one new thought, one new idea, one new way of doing something for you, we think our purpose would have been achieved. With that, let me introduce and welcome one of my personal mentors at Google, somebody who's been a phenomenal leader for us at Google, has been and continues to be, the chairman of Google, Dr. Eric Schmidt.
Thanks, Nikesh. Thank you. Thank you, Nikesh. It is a privilege to be here, and it's a privilege to work with Lorraine and Nikesh, who are the finest executives doing this sort of stuff I have ever worked with. And I think you'll see that over the next couple of days. It's my pleasure to host this morning session. I wanted to make a few comments, and then we've got some pretty interesting conversations in the next hour or so. I want to go back to 2005 when the first Zeitgeist happened, and I was looking back and, of course, using my favorite search engine, and discovered that Alan Greenspan said that the economy had strong underlying fundamentals and that the housing bubble was better understood as froth. Oh, well. Security analysts predicted that Afghanistan would be relatively stable by the end of 2005 and that the Taliban were close to giving up. Not a good prediction. But my favorite prediction of all, Steve Ballmer told Stanford Business School that Google was a one-trick pony and that we would, in 5 years, quote, Google might disappear. Oh, sorry, Steve. So, sorry, I couldn't resist. So, how do we end up with these sorts of predictions? And I think that one possible answer is because people don't know how to define how long the future is. Interesting. I think we've got a problem here as a country, as a society, and so forth. So Nikesh, you were talking about how to think about this conference. I'd like to have that be one of the questions. How long is the future? If you're a politician in DC, and I've spent a lot of time there last month, the answer is 4 years, plus or minus, or at least until you need to start campaigning. But if you're a government worker, your future is a year, or maybe a month, or if the current continuing resolution doesn't get passed, it's a day. Why are you surprised that their definition of future is quite different from your future, which I hope is your whole life, and your children's life, and your grandchildren's life, and so forth? And in fact, for corporations, it's typically the next quarter. So I've become absolutely convinced that we as a society have become dependent upon institutions that are inherently structured to produce short-term thinking. That in fact, that's one of the reasons why the debate that we're seeing is occurring. And that through incumbency and through the incentives that are generated, this is producing the kinds of outcomes. And that by thinking only in the short term, we come up with only simple solutions. Because the data says the opposite, that we're entering a world of growing complexity. If you think about it, 2 billion people online. I was looking at this. There's now 295 exabytes, which is a very large number. 315 times, I love these statistics, 315 times more pieces of information than every grain on sand on every beach on the earth. Okay, so this is a lot, trust me. 600 new tweets per second, that number is growing quite rapidly. 48 hours of YouTube videos uploaded every minute. That's phenomenal. We're at the point now where in the next few years you can get a hard drive on the equivalent of an iPod and on it put 600 years of video watched at HD resolution. So you'll never watch it in your whole life. So what happens is there's this sort of contradiction, in my view, between the way society is preparing for the future. We're grasping sort of for simple answers in a complex world. And when I think about the economy, healthcare, climate change, terrorism, which I think are probably the hardest issues that we all face, to me, these are, to some degree, a problem of institutionalized failure of imagination. There are, in fact, clever new solutions to a lot of these problems that are being discussed, but somehow they don't seem to get into the consciousness of the average citizen, the voter, our politicians, and so forth. So to me, the solution to most of the problems that we face are, in fact, based on innovation, which is, I hope Google is an example. I think many of you are examples of this kind of an approach. And innovation isn't just about change. It's about achieving smarter, more nuanced solutions. Right? It's actually doing something hard and interesting and so forth. And there are leaders, by the way, in every industry. We have some of them today to talk about some of their insights in this regard. But to me, it's about thinking about the greater scale of what we can do and also how we can use technology to solve these problems and creating sort of long-term adaptation to the changes that are around them. And that's when we get these sort of smart answers to these complex questions. So to me, what we need to do is we need to set out an agenda for innovation in our country and in the world as a whole. And when I think about it, I think the most obvious one is to change the way education is done. All of us have been the beneficiaries of strong educational systems in the United States and elsewhere. We need to invest in training of a new generation of long-term thinkers and encourage this innovative methods of teaching and so forth. There's just too much sameness in this. This is why Google, by the way, is promoting STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. The president, many other people in all the parties are very, very focused on trying to solve this problem. When you can bring more analytical people into the working sort of space, the world just gets better because of the complexity that we're all facing. I also think it's important that we invest in the arts and humanities. When I think about, Steve Jobs, right, as sort of the perfect example that ultimately he proves that nerds don't win, artists do, right? That in fact there's a reason why the merge of these two is the most interesting. We also need to develop and celebrate database decision making. The fact of the matter is there's an awful lot of data that people are just ignoring. And in fact, I think many of us feel that when we watch television and look at what's happening in the political discussions, these are almost data-free discussions, right? Give me a fact even if you're lying, okay? And the great thing about data is that we can check as voters, as citizens, as people who care. We can actually decide if it's true or not. So in order to change the world, we have to actually understand. Let's start with some facts. Where really are we? And now with modern technology, we really can know this. And we need to begin judging our decision makers based on their ability to manipulate in a positive sense, to manipulate the data and actually reason from it. I think the saying I would suggest is that in God we trust, but everybody else has to bring data. Does this mean that I'm a technocrat or I'm a stats whiz and so forth? Does that mean that I'm somehow different? No, I think it means that ultimately this world will belong to an entrepreneur. That if you think about Silicon Valley, ultimately it's about data-based decisions and taking informed risks. We invest, for example, in self-driving cars, the Lunar X Prize, renewable energy, for which we're always criticized. But in each of these, there's at least a small but very interesting possibility of an enormous new business, or at least a lot of fun, right? And hopefully both. And so when you think about your risk portfolio, how you spend your time, you should really think about asking a broader time frame question. We're taking a longer term view, in my view, on Google on the essential human problems. And this is, of course, how venture capital works. So if you think about, go back to 1998, Alta Vista ruled the world, but Andy Bechtolsheim backed two very young and very smart entrepreneurs, graduate students at Stanford, who ultimately became the corporation that represents this conference. But he was prepared to cut a check on almost no data, right? But on an intuition that this space was going to be very large. And so ultimately this model of investment and innovation and accepting failure is something which we seem to always forget, but in fact is how we will confront and, in my view, overcome the great problems that we all face, that everybody is so obsessed about right now. So if we're going to achieve greatness in the 21st century, and I believe we will, we're going to have to start with some Silicon Valley thinking. So this is a time for technology. If you think about it, the internet accounts for 3.4% of the GDP under the current measurements. That's less than agriculture. But that's a sort of a traditional way of measuring it. But it clearly understates the value of the ideas, the creative, what is known as the consumer surplus, the powerful source of new ideas and culture and so forth. It's understated and clearly is driving much of the change we know. Google, for example, we know contributed more than $64 billion in economic activity for small businesses and organizations in the United States in 2010, right, to give you a sense of the scale. So you sit there and you think, well, we're a reasonable sized company, 20, 30,000 people, what have you, but the leverage in terms of shopkeepers, manufacturers, artists, nonprofits, bloggers, and so forth really does touch all of the United States, and in fact, the global footprint is similar. So from my perspective, that the web as a platform for openness and creativity, and using it to try to harness this notion of a longer time in innovation is sort of the core challenge all before of us. And it's okay in this particular platform to try and to fail and try again. And somehow we seem to be winning these days. But what I like about it is that it's a platform for millions of different visions of innovation being born every day. And that makes an incredibly intellectually interesting world that we all get a chance to participate in, which I love so very much. But every clever app and so forth is one that proves that change doesn't just come from big institutions or small institutions. It comes from the innovation and imagination of all of us. So to me, this is about this conference, my remarks, what we're going to do in just a sec, is about making our society achieve very much its full potential. It's about making a very big bet, and that the very best days lie ahead. I think that I want you all to have a wonderful time here. I think that I love this place, and I love what we're trying to do here. And I do have some advice and a request. I want you to take the long view. I want you to judge what people say, your own reaction, in a time frame that's longer than a day or a week or a month or however many years that our current incumbencies are structuring it. I want you to look for a smart and complex solution using some nuance and think about the futures. To me, this all comes now, and it begins now, and it lasts forever, and in this century, we have a chance to really shape it. So thank you very much.